May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Again and again in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus encounters impossible situations, circumstances in which there is no hope at all. For example, last week my friend Terry preached about how Jesus was in a boat with his disciples. He falls asleep in the back of the boat, and a storm comes up on the Sea of Galilee. The waves are crashing against the boat. They are breaking into the boat. The boat is starting to sink, and the disciples, some of whom are fisher folk and had spent their whole lives on this water and know what they're talking about, the disciples say, "Jesus, wake up, we're about to die." And Jesus wakes up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and they calm down. More on this next week. It is a powerful image, especially in the mind of someone of Jesus' time and place, because a Jewish person in ancient Palestine would have remembered that the ocean and any large water, like a big lake, like the Sea of Galilee, represented chaos, represented those times when everything seems to be coming apart, when everybody around you seems to be going crazy, when there is no hope. And it even echoes the dawn of creation, when the Spirit of God moved over the ocean, the waters, before, in the darkness, before the dawn of time, and God said, "Let there be light." And God draws order out of chaos and creation out of confusion. All of that is going on in the ancient Jewish person's mind as they hear and see this story happening, which means that Jesus wields the power of God. Jesus wields the life and the laughter and the joy and the healing and the hope and the creativity of God. That's what it means, and that's why they are so amazed, both last week and this week. Okay. So wouldn't it be great if we could put that power in a bottle? Put that power in a nice little bottle and we could sell it at Kroger. Yes. And everybody would come here, we pour that power out, and the violins would swell into a climax, and the lights would flash, and whatever you needed in your life would be taken care of. If you were needing some money, then God would send you some money somehow. Or if you're needing some healing, God would send you some healing, which God sometimes does things out of miracle. You don't understand or explain it, but, this time we could make sure it happened, you see. And our pews would be full to bursting, and everyone would be having a grand time. Great idea, right? Except you know this as well as I do. That's not how God works. That's not the way God works. The healing and the power and the love and the life and the beauty of God are wild, and will not be understood or defined or manipulated or controlled or dispensed by anyone. Notice in the gospel lesson for today, Jesus encounters two more hopeless situations. Actually, the first situation is not entirely hopeless. And by the way, I do need to say that Jesus is present with us not only in our hopeless situations, but also when things are going pretty good. And when things are happy and when we're having a celebration, Jesus is with us and dancing and happy with us. But in this particular case, Jesus has just got back from somewhere over the ocean, over the Sea of Galilee. And again, we'll talk about that next week. Jesus has just got back, and Jairus, a prominent member of the community, a leader of the synagogue, comes to Jesus and displays one of the characteristics of people who are really relatively well off who follow Jesus. That is, he is humble. The other two is that you're generous and you're willing to take risks for the sake of the gospel. But Jairus is humble enough. He falls down at Jesus' feet, and he is desperate. He will do anything at all to save his little daughter who is dying. He says, please come and put your hands on my daughter. She is about to die. So Jesus goes with him, as Jesus does, with all of us, all the time. Now, you got to hurry, right? Because she's dying. Jesus has got to be quick to get there. It's like an ambulance riding along, and the ambulance is riding along, and all of a sudden, there's this woman for whom there is no hope. She has had a hemorrhage for 12 years. 12 years. And she is engaged to the best of her ability, the medical community, for 12 years. And she is destitute. She spent all of her money. And surprise, folks, the medical community is full of wonderful and powerful people who do miracles and seek to bring healing to folks. And we take it for granted. And sometimes they can't bring healing to us. And then we're shocked and appalled that they're actually human beings. There's sometimes they don't know what's wrong. They can't help us. For her, there is no hope. But she has heard about Jesus. She has heard that Jesus has calmed the storm, that Jesus wields the power of God, that Jesus casts out demons, that Jesus heals. And she says to herself, if I just touch the bottom of his cloak, then I will be made well. And she sneaks up behind him. This is rather rude, quite frankly, isn't it? She sneaks up behind him without him even knowing, and she touches the bottom of his cloak, and poof, the healing goes out of him without his consent, without him waving a hand or even praying or without us even knowing anybody's trying to do it. Out it goes into her, and she is healed. And he turns around and says, who touched me? Right? And the disciples say to him, Jesus, you're in this big crowd and people are bumping up against you all the whole time. What do you mean, who touched you? Notice, not even Jesus fully understands the healing and the power and the hope and the life and the laughter of God that works through him. Not even Jesus fully defines or controls or dispenses it. So why are we thinking that we can? It is wild, beyond our understanding. The woman knows. Jesus does not. The woman knows that she has been healed. She comes to Jesus and she tells him the whole truth. How long would it take to tell the whole truth when you've had a physical or a mental or a spiritual pain for 12 years? Well, Jesus delayed, didn't he? He was going to be a hero. He was going to help the daughter of a prominent member of the community. And he was supposed to be hurrying. And then this person who has no hope, for whom the circumstances will probably never become advantageous, he stops for her. Guess what happens? The child died. And Jairus' people come from his house. And I think they're a little bit cynical, don't you think? You listen to this, they say, why bother the teacher any further? Your daughter is dead. This is not how you speak to a person who's just lost their daughter, right? Not a good bedside manner, folks, okay? Attitude. Cynicism. Why bother him anymore? Death has prevailed. There is no hope. Jesus turns to Jairus and says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Situations, where we feel like there is no hope, do not be afraid. Just trust that God is deeper than anything, even a situation which has no hope. Just believe. So he keeps going to the house, even though the little girl has died. And when they get to Jairus' house, the place is full of people wailing and crying and making loud laments. And Jesus says, "Why are you being so loud?" And they say, "Well, she's dead." And he says, "Well, she's not really dead. She's asleep." And they laugh at him. Attitude, folks. Attitude. Again, cynicism. That death is the final power. Jesus throws them out. Jesus throws them out when they are laughing at the possibility of God's life triumphing over death. He throws them out because of their attitude. What kind of attitude are we going to have when we face situations either of celebration or of a little bit of hope or of no hope, when we face situations with cynicism and bitterness? For example, this last week, we had what we called a potluck for democracy, and we had a wonderful conversation with people from various backgrounds and various ways of being. It was great, but it was small. And it's easy to say that's just a drop in the bucket in the face of the huge divisions in our society, right? How could that possibly do any good? We could say that, or we can say, you know what? We're going to do this again. And we're going to do it in September. And this time you all are invited, okay? We had our wonderful vacation Bible school this week. And we could say, oh, it was so wonderful back in the day when we had 150 children in our vacation Bible school. That was great. And it was. No shade. No shade on it. But we also need to remember the face on Nora as she ran around with her new friend that she met at Vacation Bible School, trying to catch the funny animals that the grown-ups were pretending to be in the game that we called Zookeeper, where all the animals had gotten out of the cages in the zoo. Okay? We can think about the fact that Lily, the other day, said something off the cuff about the person whose ear Peter cut off in the Garden of Gethsemane when folks came to arrest Jesus, right? So this is in the Gospel of Matthew. How many of you know the name of the person whose ear Peter cut off in the Garden of Gethsemane when the folks came to arrest Jesus? Some of you are going to raise your hand because you know. I understand that. But not all of us. Lily, right off the cuff, just a casual little conversation, she said Malchus. It was Malchus, okay? And that's because she read the Passion narrative to us, not this last Palm Sunday, but the Sunday before last, a year and a quarter ago. We can remember how much fun it was 2 weeks ago when we shared the story of David and Goliath together with our young people and some of our adults. Attitude. So Jesus only takes with him the child's mother and father and some of his disciples. And he takes the little girl's hand. Notice, no flashing lights, no orchestras of violins swelling into a climax, just his hand, a simple human connection. And he says, Talitha kum. That's in another language. That's in the language of Aramaic, which was Jesus' native language. And everybody around him, the ancient Palestinians, spoke Aramaic. And the New Testament is written in Greek so that everybody in other countries would understand it. But what Jesus spoke, his mother tongue was Aramaic. So when you see Aramaic in the New Testament, you know that it is a particularly important and intimate moment. Talitha cum, he says to the child. Little girl, get up. And up she pops, starts walking around. Jesus says, don't make a big deal out of this. He says it very emphatically. Don't make a big deal out of this, because people think about this and not about the other stuff that Jesus is teaching. Then they will think that Jesus is nothing more than a miracle worker, somebody who will wave his wand for you and make things all better, rather than what he truly is, which is the Messiah who saves the world by dying and who rules the world by serving. That's who Jesus is. So he doesn't want people to get confused. That's why he tells people to keep it quiet. Don't make a big deal out of this, he says, but give her something to eat. Yeah. The power and the hope and the healing of God are wild and strange. We do not understand, control, manipulate, or dispense it, but it moves among us. Even though we're sinners, even though we're not perfect, even though we're positively nuts upon occasion, it still moves through us because Jesus moves through us. Thanks be to God.